Hi, thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Kevin Drinkour. I'm the EMEA Professional Business Market Development Manager for Zyxel. And today we're going to be covering an understanding of Zyxel switching for small and medium businesses. So the agenda is that we will take a quick look at some switch basics. Then we will move on to a top level view of the switches in the small to medium business series, which includes the GS1900 series, the GS1920v2 series, and the XGS1930. Then we'll take a closer look at the 1920v2 series and the XGS1930, then move on to looking at what is NebulaFlex and the benefits of using Nebula for switching. So let's dive straight into looking at switching basics, and we'll start with understanding the actual Zyxel naming convention. This is often very unclear to customers, so believe it or not, there is actually some logic behind it. When we're looking at the naming convention of switches beginning with ES means that all the switch ports actually support up to 100 megabits per second. We don't actually have many ES switches left in our portfolio, as today's requirements really require 1 gig as a minimum. Which leads us on to the GS, so any switches beginning with GS shows that all the ports on the switch are actually 1 gig. This is by far the most common and traditional switch in our portfolio and is still by far the best selling category in the industry today. So when we look at all vendors, kind of the 1 gig switch is still by far the best selling. Next up is XS, so switches beginning with XS shows that all the ports support up to 10 gig. This includes copper and fiber, as well as any switch supporting multi-gig. Multi-gig ports are able to support 1 gig, 2.5 gig, 5 gig and 10 gig over copper ports over traditional Cat5 and Cat6 cabling. After the XS we go to the XGS. This means that all the traditional ports are 1 gig and the uplinks are dedicated 10 gig. They're normally SFP+. So for example, the XGS1930, which we'll cover today, also is an XGS1930. So this means that it has 10 gig uplinks with the ability to have a PoE and non-PoE version with 24 and 48 ports. Next on our list is MGS. MGS represents our metro switch range, often used for aggregation in networks. So a termination point where we bring everything back to one central point. Has some very unique features for service providers and often used in projects, but it's just so you're kind of aware that this switch exists. So next up is looking at switches that are ending with P or HP. If the switches end with these, so P or HP, this means that the switch is a PoE switch. Historically, P used to represent 15.4 watts and HP stood for high power, so PoE plus standard, which is 30 watts per port. But today all the switches support up to 30 watts per port. So switches ending in F mean that they represent a fiber version of a switch. This often means that the switch is predominantly fiber with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 ports or copper ports for management purposes. So moving on to combo ports, what is actually a combo port? Believe it or not, we get asked this question quite a lot. So a combo port or a dual personality port is one physical port with different mediums. This gives you the flexibility to choose between either Ethernet or SFP, also you could say copper or fiber, and allows you to select based on your business requirement which medium you want to use on the switch. Okay, let's move on to PoE or power over an Ethernet, which allows us to deliver power over Cat5, Cat6 cabling using the IEEE 8023 standard. This allows us to power devices like IP cameras, wireless access points, desktop IP phones, and a whole bunch of other things which are PoE powered. PoE is normally given a classification to determine how much power they will need to be given from a single port. When you plug a device in, it negotiates the classification and often allocates this allocated wattage out of the port. The classifications which you will most commonly come across will be 802.3AF, which is class 3, which refers to delivering 15.4 watts of power per port, so PoE is often it's referred to. But you have to remember that the actual deliverable power to the actual device is 12.95 watts. Then we move on to 802.3AT, which is given the classification of class 4, which is 30 watts per port, or otherwise known as PoE+. Again, 30 watts of PoE at the port, 25.5 watt deliverable to the device. We then have some new standards which have been introduced, which are 802.3BT. There's type 3 and type 4, which are referred to as class 6 and class 8. Class 6 is up to 60 watts, and right now it's referred to as Ultra PoE or PoE++ or 4P PoE. And again, deliverable from the switch is 60 watts per port, but to the device is 51 watts. Okay, moving on, let's talk about fiber ports. So there are different modules depending on your requirements. When we talk about SFP, we talk about 1 gig uplinks, and when we talk about SFP plus, we talk about 10 gig. There are, of course, other standards like QSFP, which is 40 gig, but this is not traditionally used in SMB or small to medium businesses. So when using fiber, you need to select the appropriate module to go into the fiber slot. So we have a wide range of modules to suit your business requirements, but to make it really simple, we've designed a little snapshot of the most commonly used cables or modules. So we have, for 1 gig, we have a multi-mode and a single mode, so 550 meters and 10 kilometers. For 10 gig, we have a multi-mode, a single mode, so 1 300 meters, 1 10 kilometers. And then if you are connecting switches together, then we have a 1 meter and 3 meter direct attached cable, which allows you to simply plug one end into one switch and the other end into another switch without any additional cables being required. So I think that's enough for switching basics, and now we'll move on to looking at the top level view of small to medium business switching, which refers to our GS1900 series, our GS1920v2 series, and our XGS1930 series. So we start with some common ground for the SMB switch series. So the GS1900, the GS1920v2, and the XGS1930 series all have intelligent PoE. Intelligent PoE allows the switch to dynamically allocate the draw of power of a device rather than using classification. So when you plug a device into a switch and it's a class 4 device, for example, it will automatically allocate 30 watts per port to each of those devices. When in actual fact, most of the time the device will not be drawing 30 watts, but will be drawing a much lesser amount, sometimes even half, so 15, 16 watts. So when you add this up onto a switch, this actually means that theoretically you can double the amount of devices that you can get onto a switch by simply using dynamic allocation of power rather than using classification. All the switch series listed here, so the GS1900, the GS1920v2 and the XGS1930, are all supported under the Zyxel 1 network utility, which is a free utility that helps you streamline the initialization and setup process when deploying these switches on premise through the standalone approach. If you want to know more about the Zyxel 1 network utility, search Zyxel ZON, and you'll find the website which will explain much more detail about what the Zyxel 1 network utility can actually offer you. So here in Europe we offer lifetime warranty, so limited lifetime warranty, which refers to end of life plus 5 years on all GS1900, GS1920v2s and XGS1930s with advanced replacement as standard. We also include free firmware for the life of the product, so all GS1900, GS1920v2s and XGS1930s include free firmware updates, which is not just bug fixing but also enhancements and new features are added on a regular basis to these product lines. So the 1900 series, which is a smart managed switch, comes in a variety of models, so from 8 port to 48 port with PoE and non-PoE. It's worth noting that the 8 port and the 10 port HP are fanless and very compact in design, and the 24E is a desktop switch or desktop variant. The 1920v2 series, which is NebulaFlex or Smart Managed. We'll go a bit more in depth into NebulaFlex further into the presentation, but also available in a variety of models, so 24 and 48 variants with PoE and non-PoE, as well as at 8 HP, which is a new product that's been added to this series to add an additional higher end PoE fanless switch to our portfolio. We then move on to the XGS1930 series. So again, NebulaFlex Smart Manage and available in 28 and 52 port variants with PoE and non-PoE with 10 gig uplink. Again, we'll cover this switch in much more detail as we go further into this presentation. So we'll take a look at the 1900 series, which is a Smart Manage or Web Manage switch. The GS1900 series is well suited for light network use, for example, small offices, small branch offices, teleworkers that require some kind of wired connectivity, or maybe a few VoIP phones with a few access points that can be powered by PoE. The GS1900 series also gives you a good entry point for those wanting to add some basic VLAN control to give the network some kind of quality of service, also known as QoS, or indeed network segregation for voice, data and guest networks via port control. This switch series also gives you a lot of flexibility when trying to extend your network. For example, if you're trying to add a switch under a desk, often this means losing a lot of control over port security and gaining lots of potential issues from that cause networks to fail. A good example would be loopbacks. This is a common problem in this type of environment. So the GS1900 series has a nice set of added security features that can help you protect your network from outages and breaches. If you're looking for a compact design or small footprint PoE switch, then this can be achieved with models like the 1900 8HP and 1900 10HP, which are very small form factor and are fanless, and still give you a 70 to 77 watt PoE budget depending on the model that you select. It is worth noting though that the 10 HP and 8 HP do have external power supplies, as I know some engineers when deploying them don't want an additional unit or they don't have the space to do that under a desk, so just so you're aware of that as well. The 1900 series has a very clean and easy user interface and will allow you to get started very quickly to deploy a very simple on-premise configuration and setup. So moving on to the GS1920v2 series, which is NebulaFlex or Smart Managed. This switch series is ideal for busy office environments where a mix of wired and wireless connectivity is critical to the business environment, so higher density of wireless devices and wireless users, as well as capacity for wired devices as well. Also ideal when you require a very shallow depth unit with a higher PoE budget to fit into a very tight rack. So we've designed the GS1920v2 series to have a much shallower depth, which we'll explain a little bit further into the presentation. Also ideal for when you need to have a bit more scalability, more advanced security features. A good example would be the 1920v2 supports Mac freezing, which allows you to plug devices in, freeze the ports so that even if you remove the device and plug something else into that port, it will not function until you put that device back into the port. So another security feature amongst others that are available in the GS1920v2 series. Also ideal for environments where a greater number of fiber or copper uplinks are required. Obviously, comparing against our 1900 series, the GS1920v2 series has more capacity in terms of fiber uplinks. It's also ideal for those that require a more advanced Layer 2 feature set. There's a variety of Layer 2 features available for you to use and a much more comprehensive set than the 1900 would give you. With the 1920v2 series, obviously we can take advantage of the Nebula functionality, which we'll talk a lot more about as we go further into this presentation. But this enables you to create simple remote access monitoring and maintenance via the Nebula platform, as well as speeding up the process of deployment. So taking a closer look at the GS1920v2 series, We added a new model to the series from the previous version. So we added a 1928 HP, which is a 130 watt PoE plus, which is fanless and also has a built-in power supply. Additionally, it has a PoE usage meter on the front to kind of show you the PoE load as well. So very useful if you just want to have a quick glance at the PoE level. The GS1920v2 also has 4 times the surge protection and 2 times greater ESD, which is electrostatic discharge protection. So the GS1920v2 is much more compact in terms of depth. If you use the 1920v1 series, then the original design was 330mm, and we've reduced the depth of the device to 270mm in order to allow you to get it into shallower racks. The GS1920v2 series also offers a greater number of fibre uplinks, so 6 SFPs on the 48 and 48 HP, up to 4 SFPs on the 24 and 48 HP, and 2 SFP uplinks on the 8 HP. Additionally, the GS1920v2 has an ultra-quiet cooling system, which is built from smart cooling technology, which allows us to achieve an ultra-quiet operation. So ideal for office locations where you need to keep the noise to a low but still need to achieve a very high PoE budget. Some nice little features on the front. So we have a simple LED that tells us the max PoE indicator. We have a cloud LED to tell us that the switch is being managed by Nebula. We also have a reset and restore button. The reset button is obviously a factory reset button, and the restore button allows you to set a default, so basically save a configuration to a certain point, and at any given time, if you hold the restore button down, it will go back to this previous configuration regardless. So a really nice little feature if you want to create your own custom restore point for a switch, or if you have a default configuration, you can upload it and always restore to this point regardless of what happens to the switch. So really well thought out for engineers, and quite a common request actually is how do we kind of create our own default. So if we need to factory reset it, or then it goes back to our default rather than Zyxel's default. So a quick look at some of the sort of top level of features. Obviously the GS1920v2 is packed full of features, but just to kind of highlight some top level, so we have some essential layer 2 feature sets, so VLAN and traffic control, advanced quality of service, or QoS. We obviously support rapid span tree, multiple rapid span tree, and other features like LACP for key or lag groups. Also support layer 2 multicast as well. We have some advanced security features like the MAC freeze we described before, port security including a guest VLAN, 802.1x and radio support, as well as DHCP server guard, which allows you to set up the switch to deny access to other DHCP servers being added to a network, to disallow rogue DHCP servers to take away the traffic, which is a bit of a security risk especially in public networks. We have advanced PoE plus control, so 375 watts on the 24 HP and 48 HP models, 130 watts on the 8 HP model, as well as PoE scheduling, consumption and classification mode, which was discussed at the beginning. So the GS1920v2 series, as we mentioned before, supports NebulaFlex. I'm guessing you're still asking the question, what is NebulaFlex and what's the benefit of using Nebula? So as we mentioned at the beginning, we kind of have a section on this, so when we get to that we'll cover it in more detail. But Nebula does allow you to centrally manage the switches, access points and security devices in one central point, and we'll kind of cover all that together as we go further into the presentation. So a super quick look at the GS1900 versus 1920v2. You can quickly see, if we look at the fanless PoE versions first, you can see that the 1920v2 has a larger PoE budget, has a combo port, so has 2 uplinks which are RJ45 or copper, whereas the GS1900 10HP only kind of has 2 fixed SFPs. We have a much greater packet buffer and MAC table, which is important as you scale out into bigger environments or have more device density. Also, you can see that the GS1920v2 has a built-in power supply, so no external power block required. You just basically use a normal lead to go directly into the back of the unit. For the GS1900 24 HP and 24 HP, the 24 HP has a significant PoE budget compared to the 24 HP, so 170 watts versus 375 watts. The GS1920v2 HP also has obviously larger capacity in packet buffer and MAC table, and also has a larger capacity in terms of port count for RJ45 and SFP uplinks as well, so combo ports. When we take a look at the GS1920v2 48 HP, we can see that we still have this larger PoE budget, so 375 watts on the GS1920v2 48 HP versus the 1900 48 HP. We also have a big difference in terms of the ports available. So the GS1900 48 HP can only power the first 24 ports with PoE, versus the fact that the GS1920v2 8 HP can power all 48 ports in whatever combination depending on your PoE budget. Additionally, the GS1920v2 8 HP has 4 combo uplinks and 2 fixed SFPs, giving you a total of 6 SFPs as we described in the previous slide. This is obviously a larger capacity than the 2 fixed ports which is available on the 1900 48 HP. The XGS1930 series, just like the GS1920 series, also very well suited for busy office environments where a mix of wired and wireless connectivity is critical for the business environment. Also, additional to that, if you require larger backbone connectivity like 10 gig for business applications or larger capacity in physical devices. So for example, if you have a larger amount of access points with larger amounts of density in devices connected to the access point, then the XGS1930 series is much better suited than the GS1920. Additionally, if you require a 10 gig backbone for applications, so this could be CAD drawings, it could be access to data, it could be direct access to NAS storage devices or servers, or it could be that you are interlinking the devices together for broadcasting networks, for example, and this will allow you to do this in a much better manner with a 10 gig backbone. Also, if you require a larger 10 gig ring topology for failure or redundancy or resilience, then the XGS1930 is a much better suited match for that, as well as giving you additional features like static routing, which is a feature that the GS1920 does not have. So just like the GS1920v2 series, we have the 4x surge protection, the ultra quiet cooling, the 375 watt PoE budget. But additional to this, we have the additional security features, scalability features and static routing, as well as the dedicated 4 10 gig uplinks. So taking a closer look at some of those features, additional to what the GS1920 has, we have the layer 2 static routing, we have some traffic control for VLANs, we have some advanced layer 2 multicast support, so more in-depth multicast functionality. We have additional MAC authentication and 8021X VLAN and bandwidth assignment, so you can really traffic shape by port, as well as access control list packet filtering as well. So I've just shown a few of the features here, but reality is the XGS1930 series has a whole host of other features that may be of interest, and to look at these, please refer to the datasheet. It has the whole feature set listed out, so very easy to read and understand as well. Additional to the other feature sets, the XGS1930 has a new deployment wizard built into it. So if you're deploying via the smart managed or you're through the web GUI, then when you start the switch up, it will give you access to the wizard, which will allow you to set up security, quality of service, VLAN, and a bunch of other features to get you up and running very quickly. Okay, so let's dig into Nebula and have a look at what Nebula can do for you and how it can benefit you when you are deploying NebulaFlex switches. So Nebula itself, which is referred to as Nebula Control Center, is a central management platform which allows you to manage switch wireless and security all under one platform. You can access the devices and have access to live tools like remote cable testing and port reboots. You can also have fast access to network data and information, so like logs and status, as well as having the ability to add schedules like firmware upgrades or even PoE scheduling remotely on the fly from one central console. Nebula has also been designed to simplify the initial deployment of switches, which is where the NebulaFlex functionality comes into play. When we refer to NebulaFlex, we refer to a switch that has dual functionality. This means a hybrid approach so that you have a simple choice. So basically, the GS1920v2 series and the XGS1930 series are already NebulaFlex enabled, which means that if you are running these in standard switch mode today, then at any point you can move them to Nebula and manage them centrally, and if you decide that you need them back in a standalone mode, you can switch them back, so you can move them in and out of the platform at your leisure. So Nebula can really streamline the deployment process. As we mentioned before, you can set up the device while it's still even in the box. So there is a QR code on the side of every GS1920v2 and XGS1930, as well as the access points and some of the security devices as well, which means that you can deploy via the mobile phone app, or you can type in the serial number and MAC address into the platform and register the device and then pre-configure it while it's still in the box. When the device is plugged in, it means that it can be up and running in minutes because you've already pre-configured it, and the minute the device has access to the internet, it will automatically deploy all those settings and functions for you, including the ability to upgrade the firmware to the latest version automatically. So to get Nebula up and running, you don't need to install any software or additional hardware. You simply need to create an account online and register the devices in the platform. This can be done either by the mobile phone app using the barcodes or MAC address and serial number, or you can do it online through the portal and add the devices this way and pre-configure them. Because of this, you can access the devices anytime or anywhere as long as you've got an internet connection, and monitor and manage them from any location. All of the updates are done over the air, so firmware and changes are automatically pushed to the devices, so you don't need any remote access to the site or any VPN infrastructure to gain access to the products. You just need it to be on the internet. With Nebula, you gain better insights into your network, easier access to monitoring and configuration settings, and able to view switching information, for example, summary reports on PoE usage, bandwidth usage. You can even drill down into switch port information and get detailed information about what is happening on each switch port, including bandwidth and PoE power usage, as well as viewing the ARP table. Nebula also gives you a virtual stack, giving you fast access to port configuration in a single screen. You can select multiple ports from different switches and apply configuration changes on demand whenever you like, remotely from any location. Nebula was designed from the very outset to be multi-tenancy, which means that you can create as many organizations and as many sites underneath those organizations as you like to manage your devices. You can view the multi-tier management from a very top level. You can then drill down into organization wide, so you can see a status or quick status of the organization, and then also you can see a site wide status and have a quick overview of the network health from one central panel. So the Nebula platform itself is completely free to use. So when you buy a NebulaFlex product like the XGS1930s or the GS1920v2s, you simply register yourself an account, you add your devices to it, and you can manage them completely for free. We also have the ability to add on a professional pack to an organization. So this means that you can have a mix and match approach. So if you have 3 or 4 organizations, then you can apply the professional pack to one of those organizations. Under the free version, you get 7 days of analytics and 7 days of login information. But under the Pro Pack, you have additional auditing and visualization features. For example, status updates and alerts like push notifications to the app, 365 days of statistics on device monitoring, client monitoring, and event logs, custom reporting with 6 months range. Obviously, you can have scheduled emailed reports with customer logo. We can also do user audit. So if you are managing a larger team, then you can see who made what change and when, as well as being able to export all the data to CSV and XML. Also, we have the ability to automatically build topology visual, so we can see how everything is connected together. And this also includes VPN topology, including throughput. So it will also build out the VPN connectivity and how the throughput if you're using the gateways as well. Additional to these, within the Pro Pack, we also have enhanced features for switching, especially if you're using broadcasting networks. So we have an IPTV functionality, which allows us to support multicast control. So IGMP, monitor and report on channels, so we can see each IGMP stream as a channel, and automatically optimize network with machine learning technology for these types of environments, including identifying UPnP on ports, for example. We also have a bunch of advanced reporting, which allows us to drill down into the actual TV channels and look at the most popular, least used, and by which devices. We also have the ability to create effortless synchronization, so we can create a template where you can create a central site and then mirror this site to all other sites, and then when you make the change to the first one, it makes the changes to all the others as well. We also have the ability to clone, so if you have a switch and you want to clone the switch then on all its functions and features, and you can clone it, as well as backup and restoring the switch at any given time. So online you can create a restore point for switches and then restore the switch if you need to at any given time. So that concludes our session today. Thank you very much for attending and taking the time, and keep your eyes out for more and more of these kinds of presentations. Hopefully you found this useful. Thank you.